Throughout Season 9, a hell of a lot of you proved you've got eagle-eye vision, even on small screens like this, because Kumo and I got a ridiculous amount of comments about this car, which was hiding in the back row of, 90 episodes. So it got us to thinking, why do so many people ask about a 55-year-old Mercedes-Benz 230 SL? Now, yeah, there's going to be a full retro drive review coming in Season 10, but really, what would it be like to live with a newfangled version of this? So Kumo picked up the phone, called his friends at BMW North America, and had them send over a very orange and very newfangled convertible. To the point where the only things that are in common are two. The roof goes down and the country of origin. So you and I need to go on a bit of a science experiment to find out what it's like to live with a newfangled German orange convertible, picked out by your 65-pound white husky. Before you and I get too far down the road in this episode, let's recap what motivates a BMW i8, whether it has a roof or not. In the back is a 1.5-liter direct-injected gasoline turbocharged 3-cylinder engine, 228 horsepower, 236 pounds of torque. It comes in at 3,700 RPM. Ouch. That also has another motor next to it that's electric, and that puts out a whopping 11 horsepower and 37 pounds of torque. In the front, there is yet another electric motor, much larger, puts out 141 horsepower, 184 pounds of torque. Let's file the following under not really shocking information. Warm weather is an important ingredient to any convertible, whether it's an old one or a new one. But there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And when they first showed the production intent i8 back in 2014, there was an air shutter there, and the air shutter had a function of extracting hot air away from whatever is underneath that hood, the electric motor or anything else. And the idea was to run the hot air along with the streamlined air over the top of the vehicle and leave the vehicle as efficiently as possible to improve the overall efficiency of the vehicle. Well, that's not a problem when you have a closed roof car. But if you were to cut the roof off, one doesn't really want hot air from an electric motor going to inside the car. So the aerodynamicists and the designers got together and they reshaped the air shutter. So now the air goes around the vehicle, at least the hot air goes around the vehicle as opposed to over the top of the vehicle. The magic number in terms of total system horsepower is 369 and 420 pounds of torque. Now those numbers should sound different to you from 2.5 years ago when we did the first drive review of the i8 with the roof. It's up by 12 horsepower, and that comes completely from the front electric motor. So instead of 357, it's 369. Is there a difference in the way it drives? No, there's no difference. But I do need to clarify something here. If you are a fan of car reviews and have watched many car reviews of i8s, you probably have seen many people drive these, and when they drive them, they're like, I don't like it. It doesn't drive well. But none of those people, including me, has never, ever, ever said it's slow. It's just, here's the best way to put it. The design writes a check that the performance can't cash. Even I, a highly impractical human being, is under no delusions that people buy convertibles thinking they're practical. But here's an example that is impractical to a point that even I've never seen. Yeah, there's storage in the back, but you can't even put the proverbial weekend bag, not even for a child, let alone an adult. And the struggle is this. Everyone thinks, well, I could buy a 911 for this money. 911s have something called the frunk. Now granted, 911s don't have electric motors in the front, at least yet. But think about it, Teslas, they have electric motors in the front and they have a frunk. So I gotta believe that if the packaging engineers spent more time working on this thing, they could carve out a frunk and thus there would be real, usable, livable storage space. Because right now, there ain't any. And I did, forget about this test, I did take it to Costco, and even that was trouble for one person. Let's recap something else, and that will be the transmissions. Notice I say plural. In the back, strapped to that 3-cylinder mini engine, there is a 6-speed automatic. But in the front, strapped to that electric motor, there is a 2-speed automatic. So in essence, this is an 8-speed automatic. There are 3 modes. There's sport, there's hybrid, and there's electric. Now, we're not going to talk about the hybrid because the hybrid is the reason why everybody says this is a terrible car to drive, because it's about as exciting as a 5-day-old mackerel that's been sitting in the sun. So that's why you got to sit on the fringes and go either sport or go either electric. And for example, let's go into sport here. And I push a little harder, and this is where most people are going to use it. They're going to live with it in a fancy neighborhood like this. By the way, this is the PV Peninsula, a stunning place, and the views are amazing, as you'll see in a couple of minutes. And remember, it's carbon fiber reinforced polymer, not just the body, but the structure, which makes it so much stronger, which means you can push it a little bit harder. Is it like driving even a Cayman? Forget about a GT3. No, it's not quite that kind of vehicle. The mistake I made driving that white coupe was I never switched the gears because I figured, this is like a floppy, not connected to anything, automatic transmission, at least this little plastic piece here. But the reality is it's much more fulfilling either using the pedals or, and call me crazy, but using the shifter. So my time with the Copper i8 Roadster was not all sunshine and Kumos, because there was a sizable problem, especially considering this is sort of an electric car. It wouldn't charge. You see, I would plug it in here at the hangar or at home, and yeah, it's just slow. It's the one that comes with the car. It's a level 1. But it would charge for like 20 minutes, get me about a mile of range, and then would say fault. The only way I was able to get charged into it was drive it very aggressively in sport mode, which I really wasn't complaining about, and I'd get anywhere between 11 and 13 miles of range relatively quickly, like within 20 minutes of driving. But here's the problem. I wasn't able to test one of the major changes from the 2015 car to the 2019 car, and there's more battery in it. And what's interesting, it goes from 7.1 kilowatt hours to 11.6 kilowatt hours, but it does it in the same size footprint. So the battery is no bigger, and there's no impact on the weight of the vehicle. So really didn't get the full, I think they were saying it's like 20 or 21 miles of range. So I can't say what it's like to live with 21 miles of range in an i8 Roadster. So here I am in EV. I'm gonna put my foot into it pretty deep. I got 14 miles of range left. And one of the things you notice in the EV mode is there's no torque steer whatsoever. We've got a stop sign coming out here, so why don't we make a right turn and let's try it again, but this time change the plane of motion. There's no car coming. Ready? Here we go. You could hear the tires squeal, but virtually no torque steer. And now that I spent some time with it, I'm starting to realize that 11 horsepower, 37 pounds of torque in the back, I gotta believe the engineers are dialing just a little bit of torque from the back to balance out or mitigate the torque steer in the front, which makes it so much more satisfying to drive this as a front-wheel drive car. I mean, look at it. It doesn't look like a front-wheel drive car, but it feels so much better in the front-wheel drive mode. Thus far throughout this episode, I've been remiss to share with you that my entire time with this very fancy newfangled German convertible, it has been Ice Station Zebra here in the California Republic, but not just that. Half my time with this newfangled, very fancy German convertible, the sky has opened, and we're not talking torrential downpours. We're talking a guy with a beard, a very large boat, and a lot of animals. So if you see me in future, like Christmas and New Year breaks, posting pictures of convertibles, please remind me that is not a good time to schedule them. With that, let's do something a bit smarter, play around at the options game. We're going to start with the 2019 BMW i8 Roadster, which is about $15,000 more than the hardtop, $163,300. To that, we're going to add the Terra World package, but not just the Terra World, which adds more like stuff on the inside. We're going to do the Terra World Copper. Now, I know you're looking at this and saying, why is the car orange both inside and out? And I promise, if I were to describe it to you over the phone, you'd think I'm nuts. But you got to see it in person because Santa Maria Madre de Dios, worth the $2,500. To that, we're going to add two options that are not fitted to this car, but I have to point them out because where else are you going to get laser beams? Laser beam headlights, $6,300. Then we're going to add an option that, for the first time in the history of us ever playing the options game, I have found an option that from an OEM is $20 US. I'm not making this up, $20 US for BMW roundel valve stem caps. I don't care if you want them or not, because they're 20 bucks, you got to get them. Then we're going to add destination handling, $995, which brings us to a total retail price of $173,115. Now, you're not surprised by the price of the car, so let's put that aside. However, I'm going to point something out, again, you don't see very often. You know how BMWs normally have the package that takes care of the oil changes for 4-year, 50,000 miles. Other car manufacturers have caught on to this, even Toyota does it. Well, there is something called an ultimate care package. And what that does, it takes care of the stuff that are wear items, like the windshield wiper blades, tires, brake pads, that kind of stuff. And it ranges depending on how much time and miles you want, and goes from 600 US to a whopping 4,300 US. Now, I don't know if I would want that, because I remember in my time, I had multiple BMWs. If you've been following the show, I owned a couple. And I used to have to argue with them to do the oil changes in the frequency I wanted, which was every 3,000 miles. They do it when the car says it needs an oil change, which is more like 10,000 miles. So, you know what? Think of this as like an additional question. Would you pay extra for that ultimate care, and which one would you do? The $600 one, which I think is just for like a year, and then there's the $4,300 one, which goes to like 90,000 miles and something like 4 years. And this is where we get to the important point about the lack of a roof. Once you cut the roof off, and any stiffening they did, and I don't think they did any stiffening, it's 132 extra pounds on top of the 3,455 pounds of the base car that we drove. So effectively there is no weight penalty, you don't feel any performance or cowl shake, and that's when you get to the point of the i8, is the personality is better suited to one of a convertible than it is a coupe. When you and I discuss cars, A, that look like this, and B, cars that are made out of exotic materials like carbon fiber reinforced polymer, we never waste our time discussing pedestrian items like fuel efficiency. But this is a hybrid, so it's a law, we have to. Here we go. The US government calls this for 28 in the city, 27 on the highway, 28 combined, but there is an EV motor in the front, which means it's a full EV mode, which means it's rated for MPG equivalent, in this case 78. Now, before I share my real-world numbers with you, a couple of items that fall under the heading of food for thought. This is a 3,600-pound car. It has a very small gas tank. It's like 9 gallons, something like that. And it is $170,000. Then take into account that the whole EV charging thing didn't work. I had to drive it aggressively, either around town or in canyon roads, which I'll admit was very fun to get it to charge, and at that I could only drive it for like, 5 to 8 miles of EV range. Then there's the battery. Remember the battery that sits in the same footprint, but it's actually a bigger battery? That changes the range from 15 in the previous car, the white car we drove, to 18 in this one. So, what was my actual return? 24.7 mpg over 8 days of driving it. Not bad, and not great. And this is where it gets to what I feel is one of the weak points that could, I would say, easily be fixed, because it's 170 grand. The other numbers really don't have an impact on me. For $170,000, I feel there could be a bigger battery, or more batteries in here, to make it more like, dare I say, a Volt? Because if it could go 50, 70, maybe 80 miles of range, one could use it as a full electric car around town and have all sorts of fun, because the torque is in the right place and there's no torque steer. But it still could work in today's infrastructure, where one could take a car like this between, say, LA and San Francisco, or New York and Washington, DC.